Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're watching this. I hope all of you are having a pretty good day. Today, we're going to look at the third part of the logical fallacies, the fallacies of logical argument. Again, please remember all images were stolen from the web for educational purposes. Unless otherwise indicated, the page numbers refer to Everything's an Argument with Readings, the 8th edition. And this is not a formal paper, so be sure to cite your sources better than I do. Granted, all logical fallacies are failures of logical argument, but they were broken down into emotional, logical, and ethical fallacies because of the Mount Marty syllabus that says students will understand the appropriate use of the emotional, logical, and ethical appeals. In other words, abusing the emotional appeals, failing to follow logical appeals, or not being ethical in the way you respond to an argument or make an argument. So this is why the breakdown occurred the way it did. The first one is the hasty generalization. It's basically an inference drawn from insufficient evidence. People rush to the conclusion and state the conclusion and argue for the conclusion before having all of the relevant facts. The evidence, the claim based on the evidence that is just too small, and you only have one or two pieces of evidence as your examples, and then you make a broad generalization based on one or two pieces of evidence. I drank brand X water and got sick, therefore all brand X water must be impure. One thing, and it's not even, in some cases, this might be a faulty causation argument as well, but even if brand X water is perhaps impure, one sample is not enough to show that. Ford trucks are terrible. My friend's Ford truck is always in the shop. There are millions of Ford trucks on the road. One example out of millions is a hasty generalization. My grandfather, who smoked a cigar every day, lived to be 101. Smoking cigars, therefore, doesn't seem to affect people's health. One person out of the millions of people, again, is not enough to draw a conclusion. The next one is the faulty causation. The fact that one thing occurred and then something else happened does not mean that the first thing caused the second. People are trying to establish a chain of events that says X led to Y. And that doesn't always need to happen. Again, just because one thing occurred and then something else followed doesn't mean that everything else follows from that. And again, it's also known as the post hoc ergo propter hoc. After this, therefore, because of this. AIDS first emerged as an epidemic back in the very same era when disco music was becoming popular. That's too much of a coincidence. It proves that disco caused AIDS. I was never a fan of disco. I was alive during the disco era, and I'd like to blame it for a lot of things. But the fact that they occurred at the same time, and the fact that disco, predates the AIDS epidemic by just a couple of years, doesn't mean that disco caused AIDS. During this past summer, the Minnesota Twins lost every time I watched a game. I'm not watching the Twins play next season because if I don't watch the Twins play next season, they should win them all. Again, the fact that I watched the game doesn't really matter. Nobody on the field knew I was watching or am not watching. McDonald's must be brain food. I ate McDonald's before my last test and got an A. Once again, the fact that a McDonald's meal was eaten does not mean that it caused the A on your test. Perhaps somebody actually studied. Begging the question. It's circular reasoning. And the idea behind this is that one makes the statement and one repeats the statement with wording that is just a little different, and then says, because the second thing is true, the first must be true. There's no evidence. It's just a repetition. One accepts the claim because it says the same thing as the conclusion. Everything just goes in a circle. I'm saying X, I'm still saying X, and I just keep going in a circle. The rights of the minority are every bit as sacred as the rights of the majority, for the majority's rights have no greater value than those of the minority. I hope that minority rights are sacred. I hope that the minority has the same rights as the majority. But this doesn't tell me why. The second part of the sentence just repeats the first claim. If you are going to make an argument, you need a claim, you need data, and you need a warrant. This is just a repetition of the claim. I trust Esmeralda because she's trustworthy. What makes her trustworthy? I don't know. But she's trustworthy, therefore I trust her. I trust her because she's It doesn't give me a why. It repeats the claim. Begging the question is basically repeating a claim with no evidence and no warrant. Apple makes a good computer, therefore the MacBook is the best laptop on the planet because no one makes a better computer than Apple, and Apple makes the MacBook. It doesn't give me reasons. Quick grammar bonus. Remember that begs the question is the logical term. It does not mean raises or poses a question that needs to be answered. You make an assumption, you repeat the assumption. That's begging the question. It does not mean that this question was prompted and it needs to be answered. Begging the question is not the same as prompting the question. Non sequitur. It's an argument whose claims and reasons or warrants don't connect. Some steps in an otherwise logical chain of reasoning are omitted. Literally, it means doesn't follow. And there's no cause and effect, there's no relationship between the two notions that are being presented. Again, the non sequitur basically says there's this and there's this, but there's no logical connection between the two things. And the key, again, is a logical connection. My basement flooded last week. I should get a haircut. Both of those things couldn't be true. I probably should get a haircut, and my basement probably flooded last week. That doesn't mean that the fact that my basement flooded is not a reason to get a haircut. Dogs are animals. My cat is an animal. Therefore, my cat is a dog. My cat will be very upset if she were sitting on my lap looking at this because she knows she is not a dog, I think. George bakes great cookies. George should be our next governor. I'm glad George bakes great cookies. I love a great cookie. I don't think the ability to bake great cookies means that one should govern the state. The straw man or the straw person. The straw man is an argument where one attacks an argument that is not really being made. You paint the argument as extreme or as far less coherent than it actually is, or you oversimplify it to the point that it is really absurd and hollow, and then you attack the oversimplified, hollow version of the argument. In short, the straw man is an argument that people say, make a big argument. The straw man then attacks a weak or extreme version of that argument and then says, I have knocked down your argument, when in fact you have not knocked down the argument that the person was making. You've knocked down a version of that argument that you have created for the purpose of defeating their argument. Environmentalists won't be happy until everyone is forced to be a vegan and prohibited from owning a car. The idea that environmentalists want more restrictions on carbon emissions or want other sorts of restrictions is a pretty well-known fact. But I haven't heard anyone say that we all should be vegans, and I haven't heard anybody say that we're going to be prohibited from owning a car. They perhaps want more energy efficient cars. A lot of them, I think, want people to eat less meat because they believe that too many cows are adding to carbon emissions or whatever. That doesn't mean that this extreme argument is the argument an environmentalist is making. People who want to say happy holidays want to ban Christmas. Perhaps the person is a Buddhist and he just wants to acknowledge that there are Jewish holidays and Kwanzaa and Festivus or whatever, and just wants to include everyone. And he doesn't want to ban Christmas. If Christians want to do it, that's fine. He just wants to include everyone, and he's not sure which is which. Or perhaps people just like the idea of alliteration, happy holidays. Merry Christmas doesn't have that alliteration. Or the fact that if you want to increase funding for education, you must be a communist, because after all, it's coming from the state and you're increasing the state, therefore you must be a communist. None of these are true. All of them are straw man. You're attacking the person for an argument that wasn't made. Red herring. Red herring is an argument where you try to divert the argument into another discussion. It's kind of a so's your mom argument. Okay. Some customers have complained about the quality of our products. We have listened and will be offering reduced prices and free shipping until the end of the year. It doesn't say that they've made their products better. It just says they're going to charge you less for them. Complaints about the quality have not been fixed. We want you to think about reduced prices and free shipping. The son says, "Dad, it's hard to make a living on my salary." The dad replies, "Well, consider yourself lucky. When I was your age, I made only $40 a week." The fact of the matter is, $40 a week back in the 1970s or 1980s is a lot different than $40 a week now. It doesn't change the fact that living on a salary is hard right now. It just tries to allow the father to talk about how rough it was when he was a kid. A red herring fallacy, then, changes the subject abruptly, and it introduces an irrelevant claim or fact to throw readers off the trail. It's a diversion, and it doesn't really oppose the argument. It just tries to avoid all of the key issues within an argument. The opponent's argument is abandoned. It's not like the straw man where it's misrepresented. It's just abandoned. We're running into totally different things. Okay? For example, the $40 salary thing. It's totally and completely different than the rest of them. Okay? The $40 a week is going to move away from the kid's problem of I can't make a living to it was rough back in the day. The faulty analogy. The idea is we're going to compare two things and we're going to compare them incorrectly. If they're not relevant, then the analogy doesn't work. If you're going to make comparisons, the comparisons must be relevant. And the two things being compared don't match up feature for feature. The ideas being compared do not logically connect, or they're pressed beyond legitimacy. Politicians and diapers must be changed ever so often for the same reason. This is a nice joke. The effort behind, or the joke is that both are full of crap. However, some, politicians perhaps know their stuff. People who buy stocks are no different from people who bet on horse racing. They both risk their money with little chance of making a big profit. Now, the fact of the matter is, it's a gamble in the stock market, it's a gamble in horse racing, but it's not the same thing. One can be much more educated about the stock market than one can about horses. The stock market has a lot of things built in uh, to cut away the risk. And then just because no one has seen Bigfoot doesn't mean it doesn't exist. No one has seen an atom without a microscope. We just have to have the right tool to see Bigfoot. I think I mentioned on one of the previous slides where I was using the Bigfoot analogy, we have cell phones with cameras. We have them with us all the time. We should have been able to see Bigfoot in the wild at some point. And the fact is, Bigfoot is supposed to be 7 or 9 feet tall. That's a lot different than an atom. Finally, the paralipsis. A speaker says, I will not talk about something. But by saying I will not talk about X or Y or Z, they are actually talking about X or Y or Z. And therefore, they are talking about the thing they say they're not going to talk about. If you take a look here, one of the big problems is the idea that you're going to, mention the other faults by saying you're not going to mention them. The slide here, I think, gives you a perfect example. I'm not going to bring up rumors of my opponent's infidelities because I think it would be unfair. Or, to go to one of my favorites, I'm not saying I'm responsible for this country's longest run of uninterrupted peace in 35 years. I'm not saying that from the ashes of captivity never has a phoenix metaphor been more personified. I'm not saying Uncle Sam can kick back on a lawn chair sipping on an iced tea because I haven't come across anyone man enough to go toe to toe with me on my best day. But yes, Iron Man is saying all of those things. Okay, I hope everyone has a good day. I hope I've figured this out and can shut it all down. And I hope to see all of you in class next class.